Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this side event, Understanding Risk in a Changing Climate. My name is Loretta Heber-Girardet, and I am the Chief of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction's Risk Knowledge Branch. And I'm really pleased today to have a diverse panel of speakers to share their insights on the challenges and opportunities that we have at hand to improve our understanding of risk and better guide action on climate and disaster risk reduction in the face of the growing climate emergency. Before I begin, I would like to just remind you that this is a silent session, and that means that we have to wear headphones if we want to hear the speakers. We also have several speakers who are online, so it'll be important that you have your headphones. And we will also have a Slido as a tool that we will be using to enable you to ask questions. So please look at the Slido information so that you can actually ask your questions, as well as for those that are online. And this will be easier than trying to actually ask questions in a very loud auditorium here. So let's begin. We all know that climate-driven hazards around the world are today increasing in severity, frequency, and impact. And we need to come to better grips with how to effectively manage the full range of climate and disaster risks. This is becoming more important than ever before. Climate change is really putting pressure on all of the world's essential systems. And as we have seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, interconnected, cascading risks are reverberating throughout our societies and our economies. We know, for example, that environmental or water-related risks accounted for more than half of the top 10 risks in terms of both likelihood but also the impact. Better risk knowledge to underpin investments in climate and disaster risk reduction is essential. And we heard this earlier this week in the launch of the Early Warning for All initiative, the action plan, which aims to bring early warnings to all countries in the next 5 years. Risk knowledge is an essential and the very first pillar of the value chain of early warning. But we have a challenge. We need to increase access and the use of risk knowledge, whether applied to early warning systems or the design of anticipatory action or long-term investment in adaptation and risk reduction. Today, we will hear from a diverse range of representatives on the front lines of improving risk knowledge. We will hear examples of how more systemic collection and accessibility of risk information in readily usable forms to meet the needs of a diverse group of actors is making a real difference in preparing countries to get ahead of the curve. We will hear how countries are seizing the opportunity to confront risk in more integrated and comprehensive approaches. And we will hear about how the private sector is supporting this ambition by helping make risk data a global public good. We will first invite each speaker to make 3 minutes opening remarks to ensure we keep adequate time, we hope, for an open discussion for your questions during today's one-hour side event. And our first speaker is Sarah Baisalo-Nyanti, who is joining us online from Juba. She is the Deputy Special Representative for the Republic of South Sudan, where she also served as Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator. She will be sharing with us pre-recorded remarks on how the United Nations is working with local partners to improve risk knowledge.
It is a pleasure to join you today from Juba for this COP27 side event, Understanding Risk in a Changing Climate. I want to thank the UN Office for Risk Reduction for organizing this side event and for really focusing on the challenges we face in terms of deepening the understanding around the culture of risks in South Sudan amongst the UN, government, non-government, and other partners. South Sudan is the world's newest republic, gaining its independence 11 years ago. And there are few other countries like South Sudan that really demonstrate the interconnectedness and the cascading nature of risk like we have in South Sudan, a country that has endured appalling suffering and massive displacement due to political upheaval, but also due to the serious climatic shocks, the extreme weather events that make it very difficult for families to cope. One stark statistic says it all. 8.3 million people, almost 75% of the population of South Sudan, do not have enough food to eat on a daily basis, demonstrating the seriousness of famine, which is caused somewhat by the climatic shocks that South Sudan faces. The country's inadequate health systems have also had to contend with COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years. In these circumstances, there is real concern about how to improve the country's ability not only to prepare for seasonal disasters and climatic shocks, but to manage its overall risk and avoid the creation of new risks. Working together, the UN and its partners are deepening our shared understanding of the risk environment to inform our action, guide investments, and bridge programming across peace, humanitarian, and development nexus. Earlier this year, the Interagency Standing Committee peer-to-peer mission to South Sudan called for a much stronger joint approach to context analysis, programmatic risk assessment, and risk management measures. At the same time, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management has called for the implementation of the Sendai framework, and they are demonstrating commitment by developing a national disaster risk management policy endorsed by the Transitional Government of National Unity, and is working on a new national disaster management bill. The government is also developing a disaster management committee in both state and county levels to ensure that the concerns of communities on the front line of disaster risk are taken into consideration. These commendable initiatives are the first steps, but much more needs to be done. The Ministry of Humanitarian and Disaster Management is taking significant steps in terms of ensuring that the people of South Sudan and the needs that they have in relation to risk reduction are met. People every day have to manage their lives in a way where they don't know how to confront the challenges they face, whether at the household level, at the community level, whether or not they should go out to farm or whether or not they should stay at home because they don't understand how they can better plan their lives to confront the challenges that face them as it relates to droughts and flooding and all of the things they face in South Sudan. The government is working with the UN and partners to ensure that together we can analyze the context, state-specific, county-specific, community-specific, to understand the trends, understand how this information can be used for better planning, how this information can be used to continue to guide investments and to drive investments towards harmonized and synergistic programming that will make changes in the lives of the people that are tangible, that we can approach livelihoods and empowerment activities from a perspective that factors the risks and the climatic issues that face the people of South Sudan every day. We look forward to a successful side event, and we look forward to working towards implementing the recommendations that will come out of this side event. Ultimately, that the people of South Sudan, the children of South Sudan, can live in a South Sudan where they adapt to the climatic realities, but also that we mitigate the risks that they confront every day. Wishing all of us a very successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah Baisalo-Nyanti. And I would just like to maybe point out the importance of improved risk analysis in protracted crisis settings like South Sudan, and how much an improved understanding of risk can be such a critical contribution to the humanitarian development nexus. Bringing together humanitarian and development actors around a shared understanding of risks will help humanitarians address the shorter-term needs, while development actors really tackle the underlying drivers of risks. So it was a really good, I think, example to start off today's conversation. But let's turn now to our first in-person speaker, Mr. Rowan Douglas, who is head of the Climate and Resilience Hub at Willis Towers Watson, a global advisory and reinsurance firm. Now, Rowan is here today on behalf of the Insurance Development Forum, IDF, which is a network of industry, governments, and international institutions working to harness insurance and reinsurance to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. He will speak today about how the private sector can help address some of the risk knowledge gaps and challenges that were just underscored by our first speaker from South Sudan. Rowan, the floor is yours.
Well, Laurie, thanks so much, and it's lovely to be with you here today and everyone in the room And it's also such a privilege to follow Sarah's talk from the... And it's a great pleasure to be here, and also to follow Sarah's talk from South Sudan. And to build on what you just said, Laurie, next week there's going to be a major announcement with a humanitarian agency to scale up disaster protection at a massive scale between the humanitarian and the reinsurance sector across 10 countries around the world. And it's only possible because the reinsurance sector and the humanitarian sector are now using the same language of risk, the same metrics. And that's so important. It's great to be on this panel. I remember we've worked together with the UNISDR, or UNDRR now, for 12 years. Yep. Looking across at Jim, working with him on the infrastructure work with academia for almost 10 years. And I can see Carlos on the line in Costa Rica. We met together about 3 months ago in the context of the National Adaptation Plan and the financial regulatory reforms in Costa Rica. And what's happening here at COP this year is so exciting because for the last 27 years, the private sector and the public sector and the academic sector have shared the same language in emissions. We all talk the same language of tons of carbon. Unfortunately, in the world of adaptation and resilience, that common language has not existed. And because of that, we've been unable to integrate what the financial and wider public sector needs to do to retrain the invisible hand of economics to take account of these risks, to make sure we invest in the right things in the right places to save millions of lives and livelihoods in the future. But at this COP, through a number of initiatives I know we'll be speaking about a little later on, the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, where the insurance sector, with the help of the public sector, is going to be supporting the V20 countries in developing significant local risk modeling expertise that can be applied across finance and business. And more at a broader level, the industry also wants to support the ability for all countries to have a common reference point of their current and future exposure to climate and natural hazards, which can be incorporated into national statistics and wider planning. Why does the private sector want to do this? Partly because, like all of us, we're trying to develop a shared and secure future. But the critical thing is, unless we can share the same language, the same metrics, business will not be possible. So there's so much that needs to be done in the world of engineering or insurance. But until we can allow us all and support the data that we have and make it available in the wider arena to enhance what's in the public sector, we all simply won't have the information we need. And I know in the coming minutes on this great panel we've got, we're going to see some examples. But I think if Paris was the COP around politics, Glasgow was the COP for economics, I think we'll look back at Sharm-el-Sheikh and it'll be the COP for resilience and adaptation and data. And it's going to be absolutely as important as the other three. Back to you, Laurie.
Thank you so much, and I hope that is indeed the case, because without the evidence for action, we really risk achieving maladaptation rather than adaptation, and so it's so critical. And it's really fabulous to hear about your collaboration in the humanitarian space. And I might just add, as I mentioned a few moments ago, one of the big outcomes of this COP will be the Early Warnings for All initiative. The role of the private sector, including around data and analysis, is absolutely pivotal in this. So I really appreciate these comments. And I really look forward to hearing a little bit more today about how countries can make better use of layering risk information from the private sector to strengthen their DRR planning, for example, and their adaptation planning. So I come from United Nations for Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and we too have been very much thinking about how we can improve the data ecosystem for countries so that they have the evidence they need to take action to confront the climate emergency. We will now hear from one of our colleagues who unfortunately could not be with us today, but she will be joining us through a video statement. to provide an overview of a new product that we have been rolling out right now throughout the world called the RICS, which is the Risk Information Exchange. And our goal with the RICS is to provide a platform for countries to improve access to existing global, regional, and nationally generated risk data across the range from hazards, but also critically important exposure and vulnerability, as well as climate change projections. So I would now like to give the video floor to Jenty Kirschwood, Chief of UNDRR's Global Risk Analysis and Reporting Unit. Please.
Hello, my name is Jenty Kirschwood, and I head up UNDRR's Global Risk Analysis and Reporting team. Thank you for this opportunity to provide a 2-minute overview of our Risk Information Exchange Platform, or RICS. The RICS currently contains 3 different tabs: the home page, the All Data Listings page, which is the search engine function of the website, and the country profile pages. The home page opens with an interactive map of disaster risk data for the RICS countries. The current default base map looks at flood frequency, but this can be changed to some of the other variables of interest, such as earthquake risk. Underneath the heading, there are 4 different tabs for data categories around hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and climate change. Continuing to scroll down the page, there are also icons for different data categories, as well as a live dashboard that shows summaries of available datasets and information sources. As you can see, there are currently over 500 hazard-related entries. The All Data Listings page is our search engine. The filtering tool allows the user to find specific datasets and information sources for their needs. To search datasets for specific areas such as Costa Rica, there are corresponding filters. And it's possible to filter by categories or even data formats and other choices. Finally, there are the country profile pages. Not all of these are publicly accessible, but more of the 51 under development will be coming online shortly. Choosing South Sudan, for example, the page includes a summary of the most recent datasets added to the platform, as well as an interactive map to provide specific and more detailed data. This map is then followed by a climate change projection dashboard, which specifically looks at SSP5 or RCP 8.5 predictions. On the left, there are yearly predictions. On the right, the monthly projections for 2050. And it's possible to change between different variables using the tabs on the bottom. The page also includes links to some external sites, including UNDRR's Prevention Web and Disinventar. We hope that this video will inspire you to explore the site further, and we really welcome your feedback and suggestions on how to further develop this tool in the future. Our contacts are on the website, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Jenty. So this is our modest contribution to the climate emergency. We know that there is actually quite a lot of data in countries, but it's often sitting in different ministries and different UN organizations. And so by making it more readily available, we hope that we will be able to help end users access the information that they need. But at the same time, of course, it's not enough simply to make the information available. It really does need to be married by capacity strengthening, institutional strengthening in risk knowledge. And these tools need to be used foremost by national actors for their full worth to be maximized. But it is exciting to see that there is a demand for this information, and we are working hard to increase our coverage and to strengthen our collaboration with different partners across the UN and the private sector, so it can become a portal for everyone to use to strengthen their work around risk knowledge. So I would now like to turn to Jim Hall, the Professor of Climate and Environmental Risk at the University of Oxford and Director of Research in the School of Geography and the Environment. Professor Hall is a member of the UK's Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology as well as a commissioner of the National Infrastructure Commission. And he will provide us with an update on the cutting edge of physical climate risk analysis to inform adaptation decision-making, investment, and adaptation finance. And this analysis is being made available globally through the Global Resilience Index Initiative, which we'll hear about. So, Professor Hall, please.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's a great pleasure to be here, and what I'm going to present follows on extremely well from the presentations and introduction that we've just had, because I'm going to provide a conceptual overview and then some snapshots of material that we're launching here at COP in the Global Resilience Index Initiative, and also a bit of a sense of the direction of travel, because this is really work in progress. And at this COP, as Rowan has said, we're really gaining momentum around this initiative. First of all, just the concept of this language of risk, which Rowan has referred to, where for many years now, in the insurance sector, in academia, and in the humanitarian sector, we've been talking about intersecting evidence of hazards, climate-related hazards, another version of hazards, with exposure of people, physical assets, nature, and then the vulnerability, the sensitivity of those assets to the hazards when they materialize. Taking that a step further, we need to understand how, when shocks occur, they propagate through networks to cause wider disruption and sometimes systemic failures and systemic losses. And that's what we're doing here, in that we're extending that conventional risk calculation to look at the effects on networks and how economic losses, human impacts can propagate through those networks in order to come up with a picture of risk. And then the final steps here, step 9 in the picture at the bottom, is how do we use that information in order to inform adaptation, inform resilient investments, to actually act to manage risk. Because this is why risk is so important. We need to know what the risk is, how it's going to change in the future, but also how by acting we're going to be able to get that risk down to a more manageable level. So a couple of snapshots from the GRI interface, which is launched here at COP. This interface is live, and I'd have loved to have given you a live walk through it, but somehow the technology didn't permit. But we've got a couple of screenshots here of how in this interface, this is entirely publicly available data sets of, as you'll see, the tabs across the top, and recognize the intersection with what Genty was just showing us. This framing in terms of hazard data sets here, both at present and in future scenarios. Exposure data sets looking at population, buildings, economic activities, and then converting that into risk. And now looking ahead, this is a snapshot from a version of this tool which was developed with more detailed data in Jamaica as part of the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investments with support of the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. You can see how, as we dig deeper, you can get these very detailed pictures of risk, damages at different return periods, how that risk is going to change in the future in different climate change scenarios, and then finally use that risk information to say where in these systems, in infrastructure networks, in this context we're looking at the power network of Jamaica, where should we be intervening in order to get risk down? Because adaptation decisions are not easy. Don't believe anyone who pretends that all adaptation decisions are cost beneficial. They're not. We have to prioritize very vigorously in order to use the limited resources we have in order to manage risk going into the future. And that is what this type of analytics is helping to tell us. And we're on a very exciting global journey with partners in the public sector, in the UN system, and in academia to take this work forwards.
Thank you so much. And it really is very exciting, because I remember when this was first launched, I believe it was at the last COP. And so in a year's time, a tremendous amount of progress has been made. And of course, this is so critical because the impacts of climate-driven extreme weather events are increasing. And so understanding where people and assets are located and where they are most at risk takes on a really renewed importance. And I think it's also worthwhile to emphasize how tools like the RICS can complement the work that's being done by GRI and vice versa, that they're mutually supportive. And of course, it's this combination of tools and the interoperability of systems that is critically important. So another great example, public-private partnerships, that's really allowing us to share physical exposure data and vulnerability. And sometimes this sits in ministries that national disaster management agencies don't access. So bringing it all together is a tremendous service. Before we move on to the next speaker, please do start asking questions through Slido, because then we will be able to take your questions in order as they come. So please go ahead and use the Slido app to ask your questions. So I now have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Eric Seyema, who is the director of the National Disaster Management Agency in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Eric holds a master's degree in atmospheric science and meteorology from the University of Reading and is a longtime collaborator with our own office, UNDRR. He will be sharing insights about the importance of assessing interconnected risks and how Eswatini is deepening its risk knowledge platforms and research. So Eric, over to you, please.
Thanks, Laura, and good morning, colleagues. I'm Eric. I come from the Kingdom of Eswatini, and we're working with the National Disaster Management Agency, which is actually, the main coordinator of disaster risk interventions in the country. So we know that, talking after the previous speakers, I think it becomes a bit easier because they've unpacked how the risk landscape is sort of changing and the need for, innovative kind of approaches and new approaches to understanding risk. Because what we have done, and maybe I should have started by thanking the UNDRR for the opportunity and also for the assistance in, building our capacity and holding us to improve our risk understanding landscape. So we are, amongst the few countries in Southern Africa to sort of maybe to be engaged and involved in the new approaches of risk understanding, where we understand that risk now, there's a new paradigm of the systemic nature of risk. Not risk being, maybe the way it was defined before. So we are introducing or implementing the graph with the help of the UNDRR, and we've held a number of initiatives and workshops and capacity building initiatives to sort of maybe help us improve. So it was shown by Prof here that we've set up our RICS platform. And that RICS platform, we believe that it will help us get the missing data, because the risk information data is scattered everywhere, as it was said before. So which created a challenge in creating that comprehensive kind of understanding. So now what we are doing, we are busy with the help of UNDRR trying to populate this risk platform and enhancing. We should believe that it will enhance our understanding. But we know that, besides that, there's need for, proper kind of governance. And we've sort of realized a gap there. And we saw that what we need to do, we also need to improve our legislation to be in tandem with the current times, so that we don't maybe have the barriers which we had before of working in silos. And our legislation is trying to sort of maybe broaden and encourage the interagency kind of collaboration, and also maybe the sharing of data, because for us to be able for anyone to understand risk, you need the good collaboration and the enabling environment so that you know it can assist you to deliver on your mandate. And I'm happy to see that, I mean, the theme of the COP this year is talking about togetherness. So that, I think, is a strong statement that we all need to take forward and ensure that we work together to solve the problems of the current times. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, Eric, your presentation really underscores the importance of engaging multiple ministries. The data doesn't sit in one place, but also the ministries of finance and central banks, and bringing them into the equation as well, so that we can improve our understanding of interconnected risk, but also we can make decisions based on that improved understanding. So thank you very much. We now go back online for our next speaker, who is Mr. Carlos Picata Rojas, who's joining us live from San Jose, where he is director of the Strategic Development Unit in Costa Rica's National Commission for Risk Prevention and Emergency Assistance. And Carlos will share with us his perspectives on how ministries and departments in Costa Rica are coming together to improve risk knowledge, particularly through better sharing of the risk information that is sitting in these different ministries. So, Carlos, the floor is now yours, and thank you for joining us.
Buenos días.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I hope you're hearing me correctly and that you're listening to the live translation. So today, I would like to briefly present our experience with the process of the application of the Global Risk Assessment Framework to evaluate risk.
Importante contexto.
I'm going to give you some context about it. So can you change slides, please? Thank you.
En el caso de Costa Rica, desde 2015.
So our case, in 2015, the government approved the National Policy for Risk Management.
Con la protección.
One of its pillars is related to the protection of the investment and the services in our country. In 2020, we met with the UN and we got their support regarding this framework. It has several specific elements related to using information to improve the knowledge we have about risk and to strengthen our capacities when it comes to losses and accountabilities. We're doing some investments in this regard. Next slide, please. We could talk a lot about this process. There's been a great collaboration with several institutions, but especially we worked on how to apply this in the different institutions of the state, how to apply this framework all throughout the institutions. We obtained several results, like an inventory of different data with more than 70 sources of information to evaluate risk. We also created knowledge processes and knowledge to apply this framework. And we created a tool to evaluate the risk and the direct impact of the disasters in terms of losses. This is very important to recognize the performance of the emergency services. We want to have, because at the end of the day, the disasters have a cascade effect on the whole society. Finally, we apply these in the sector of critical infrastructure to support decision-making in our country. Next slide, please. So, the results. We learned a lot all along this process. We had a lot of contribution. This framework contributed a lot to know more about risks in Costa Rica and risks and losses that we have to assume as ours. This graph opens a window and gives us a lot of information about what needs to be done. And we work to give the information to the people that need to act. We also improved our capabilities, and at an institutional level, we also worked to analyze the situations according to statistics. Another note is that we worked on every institution and every company to learn in a continuous way about the harmonization of information of these analyses. We don't want this to be something one-time thing. We need this to be a continuous process. Also, we need to work on how to maintain a permanent articulation among all the actors. With this global framework, our aim is to understand this systemic effect. That's why articulation among the actors is so important. Finally, it is very important to maintain the collaboration from a central level to maintain the articulation of the job and all the duties that need to be done. We are also working on the accountability. That's very interesting to the United Nations. But it's also important for our population. It needs to be guaranteed that this accountability is happening and it's being used in the optimal way. This is, well, a brief, very, very brief overview of our framework. Thank you so much for inviting us to being here today. And I would like to say thank you to the United Nations for the support we have received all along this process and for all the learnings. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Carlos. And I would just like to really congratulate Costa Rica because it has really advanced very well in its efforts to improve risk knowledge across all of the sectors. And it does really provide a wonderful case study for other countries to look at how they have carried out this work and how it's being used very practically in that country. Our final speaker today is Anwar Bakhsh, who joins us online from the Planning and Development Unit at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management in Trinidad and Tobago's Ministry of Civil Defense. Anwar's professional duties cover early warning systems, recovery planning, partnerships and resilience building. And this country is the latest country in which our teams have been working to support better use of risk information. So we're very eager for your perspectives, Anwar. Please, the floor is yours.
A very good early morning from Trinidad and Tobago, Laurie, and thank you for the introduction. Really, Trinidad and Tobago, first of all, needs to thank the UNDRR for the opportunity to advance the Sendai framework within our context of operation. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. Within recent, we would have adopted the Sendai framework at Trinidad and Tobago's and at the cabinet level and agreed for this to be ratified and implemented. And this created the enabling environment for disaster risk reduction and climate risk management. In order to do so and understanding that there is a huge gap in data, we would have been engaged by the UNDRR to introduce this RICS platform. And as one of our speakers spoke, there must be a multi-sectoral approach. And how did we do this? Well, we created what is called a cabinet-approved National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee. And this committee in itself brings together government stakeholders, private stakeholders, civil society, academia, and grassroots community members to provide us with data. And by doing so, we are enabling the opportunity to identify our gaps of data that are existing, but more so, understanding the vast amount of data that exists within our ecosystem. And so we are moving forward now to create this opportunity with RICS that we can have a joint national adaptation plan. So we can have the CRM approach adopted in Trinidad and Tobago and ensure that we improve our resilience. So we are thankful for the opportunity. We are happy to share with any member state or any other small island developing state, or as a matter of fact, anyone, on how did we bring together our communities? How are we building this public-private partnership to ensure that we address comprehensive risk management from a holistic approach? Thank you, Laurie. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anwar. And I would really like to point out how small island states, such as Trinidad and Tobago, have so much to gain by really focusing on the better understanding of the vulnerability and exposure they're facing to climate change, but also being supported to use that information in integrated DRR and climate change planning. And I would use this opportunity to just mention that UNDRR is not only supporting on the data, but we are also supporting very much through a program called Comprehensive Risk Management. And the aim of this program is to break down the silos when it comes to climate and disaster planning, and really looking for more integrated DRR and climate change adaptation. And a country like Trinidad and Tobago, but others, the Maldives, is where we would really see the greatest benefit to more comprehensive risk management approaches. So with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers and now move to some questions that have come up through Slido. And I've taken a look at the questions. They are excellent, so I hope we have a bit of time to go through them. What I would like to do is maybe start with the very first question and ask Professor Hall to answer this one. Professor Hall, the question is, with so many countries confronted by capacity constraints, information management and e-government particularly are under-resourced, a lack of capacity. How can or how should tools like the GRI and RICS be embedded in national systems? What can we do to ensure that they're owned by the national governments and that they have the capacity to use them?
Great question. And I'll just say a couple of things in response to that. The first is the transformative capacity of open data and open tools to analyze and interpret that data. So data sets which are in the public domain and tools, freely available tools now for geospatial analysis, free and open online codes to do that analysis. And all of the material which I've shown in the GRI is openly available and accessible. That, of course, needs capacity in country. And so building up that geospatial analysis capacity is absolutely fundamental. But some investment in capacity now gives incredible leverage in terms of what it enables people to do. The second thing I would say is around the role of global data sets. Global data sets are not perfect. We're not pretending that they are, but they provide the starting point for national scale analysis. And by having starter kits out of global data, that gets people going. And in particular, if one can go from beginning to end of an analysis, going from data layers to risk analysis to adaptation, decision-making, and prioritization. And once people have seen that once, using global data, then they can get into it. It can be improved with local data, but they really understand the purpose of this, how using data enables better decisions. So I think global data sets have a really fundamental role in doing that.
Thank you very much, Professor Hall. And Eric, I might just ask you, I mean, the question is, how can we really ensure that national governments can use this information in a way that allows them to improve their decision making? You've had the experience with the RICS, but there are other data platforms as well. Are there any insights that you would like to share?
I was almost speaking without the mic. Yeah, I think it's you know, any intervention really needs the political kind of leadership and will. So the national governments they need to, I mean, to get the buy-in, and also, but that I think it's best if maybe the people in the leadership are also capacitated in some instance to appreciate and understand the information that is being shared, because at times you find that because of competing priorities, sometimes you find that the risk information is not elevated to to the level which it's supposed to be, and that maybe deprive also maybe the people who are most vulnerable the opportunity to sort of maybe be assisted in the proper kind of way. So the national governments really need to, I mean, the people in the leadership really need to to take up maybe their role properly. But as I said, I think it is through understanding the linkages and also the impacts, and how maybe best can then they support the population.
Thank you so much. I would like to now ask our two speakers online to take the next question. And I hope the translation could be made available in Spanish as well. But maybe we start with you, Anwar, and then go to Carlos. As mentioned before, we note that data exists, information exists, but sometimes it's held on to very strongly by the line ministries, by the UN agencies, by other sectors that have the information. What can be done to create much more of an environment of information sharing so that we can all benefit from the shared analysis and the tools? So maybe, Anwar, we will start with you. Have you got any tips on how we can break down this holding of information and create an atmosphere where information is shared and used collectively?
Thanks, Laurie. For me, I think it's important that we gain trust among our stakeholders, and we ensure that we maintain constant collaboration. And there must be a two-way approach to doing this data sharing and data gathering mechanism, so that you are not the only one requesting, but you're also receiving equally as I am. And we have seen in Trinidad and Tobago that once we have gained the trust of our stakeholders, once we have ensured that they have articulated well why this data is received and why is it important, then for sure we can ensure that data is available and shared.
Thank you, Anwar. And Carlos, can we ask you also to share your perspective? Because Costa Rica has actually been very successful in aggregating information from different sources. I hope that you got the question. Carlos?
Perdón, tenía problemas con el micrófono.
Sorry, I was dealing with some issues. So in the case of Costa Rica, I work in an institution that works thanks to the coordination between institutions.
Diría, es fundamental.
And I would say collaboration between institutions is fundamental. This is the essence of our work.
La evaluación de riesgo.
The perspective we have when it comes to risk reduction needs to understand the systemic character of risks, and we need data. And here in Costa Rica, the public services are offered by public enterprises. That's necessary to work, articulate the work in a collaborative and joint way. So I cannot conceive getting results without a collaboration between different bodies and institutions.
instituciones, pero en el caso de
Also, when it comes to understanding risk, we need to know everything because we need to know if something happens, which services are going to be impacted, which parts of the country are going to be impacted. We have discussed this with the United Nations, and we also try to involve the private sector, especially the agriculture sector. And when we were working on the graph, we saw that we also needed to involve the different representatives of the different private services and private industries in our process in order to be successful, because it's needed to have the first analysis of which services and which parts of the countries have been impacted, and so to make a better decision making. It's essential to reduce risks and implement mechanisms, and also to make financial decisions, because the private sector are going to be impacted by these decisions as well. And also this is needed to protect the population. So having the collaboration of all the sectors is fundamental.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd now like to go to the question. I don't know if it's still on the screen, but it actually relates to the fact that having risk data available is not enough. Just like we know that early warning doesn't necessarily lead to earlier action, because there are barriers to action and barrier to even using risk data. So the question is really, how can we identify and overcome the barriers that exist to using risk information, to early warning systems that actually function, but it doesn't actually trigger the types of actions that we need to see to improve the lives and save lives in emergencies? And maybe, Rowan, I would start with you to see if you have any perspectives on this.
I do. I think what's really happening across a range of sectors is that there's now such a demand for practical implementation beyond, if you like, pure information for its own sake. Just two examples. I've been quite involved in the journey over the last 5 years of financial regulators and financial standard setters. I mentioned I was lucky enough to visit Costa Rica recently, who are requiring companies to disclose risk and then act on those decisions under regulatory requirements. Regulators are having to manage the systemic risk of their country systems, and that's creating active demand because of pressures that new forms of users of this data are under. Not to simply receive the information, but to create the systems. I'm sure it's the same in early warning, or and I think it's that change that's creating the urgency to move from analysis into integration into key services. Ultimately, all sorts of new players in this space who haven't been in this area before have career risk if they don't adequately integrate physical climate risk into their, or it could be through macro work like the national adaptation plans that are being increasingly published by countries, will often name responsibilities of institutions. And I think that's the step that's becoming so evident.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. And I'd like to go to the question about how do we avoid duplication. Professor Hall spoke about harmonizing and standardizing data. We are living in a time of a data revolution, and that brings really great advantages, but there's also risks of duplication, of wasted resources, of spending money that actually duplicates each other's work. So, Professor Hall, maybe I'll go back to you, and then we'll have a final thoughts from each of our panelists. What can we do to really coordinate better and not to duplicate each other's work while ensuring that risk data is made available to all?
Yeah. Great question. First of all, I'd say that I'm not panicking too much about duplication.
Okay.
In the sense that, as you've said, Laurie, this is a system which is evolving incredibly rapidly. There's an abundance of new sources of data and new technologies for analyzing that data. Incredible things going on, in particular in relation to machine learning, but new sensors and crowdsourcing. And so with an innovation ecosystem which is evolving so rapidly, it's inevitable that there's going to be quite a lot of innovators doing quite similar things. And that's just part of the ecosystem, given the stage in this process that we are. And I foresee that there will be consolidation, there will be standardization, and in a moment I'll talk a little bit about where perhaps we need to go next on that. But the other thing I'd say about duplication is that duplication is itself learning. And so there's mention here about consultancies, about governments, and actually, unless you try and do some of this for yourself and invent it yourself, you don't deeply understand it. So that's another reason why I'm not worrying too much about duplication. But yeah, in the long run, we have to go very far, very fast, and so we need to be as efficient as we can in order to achieve that. And so that means converging around certain open platforms like GitHub, certain open codes and standards like QGIS and Python, and an increasing amount of more technical standardization. And I would emphasize the role of the UN, of course, in this, in terms of helping people to come together, accelerate that standardization, and also engage people around shared data sets.
Thank you. Fantastic answer. It's not the duplication, but we need to share our learning so that we can each accelerate the work that we're doing. So we have just 2 or 3 minutes left, maybe 2 minutes. So what I'm going to do is ask each speaker 20 seconds to just tell us, what's that final thought you'd like to share? If this is the COP on data, what do we want our listeners to take home as the final message? And I'd like to start with Anwar and then Carlos, so you can get your headsets ready. But Anwar, 20 seconds. What's that last thought you'd like to share?
Thanks, Laurie. Just quickly to say that there are mechanisms and systems that are in place, and therefore there is no need to reinvent the wheel. But let's advance the RICS platform. I think it's an excellent initiative, and it's my pitch for the RICS platform under the UNDRR side. So thank you, Laurie.
That's great. Thanks, Anwar. Carlos, please, 20 seconds. Carlos, just a final 20-second thought.
Gracias, perdón.
Thank you. Sorry.
Que
I would just like to point out that the learning that we have during our process has been very useful.
hemos tenido
And the access that we have had to different alternatives to evaluate and present our data has been extremely relevant. And finally, I would like to say that the role of the UN in these respects, in these transformative processes and articulation of experiences within country is essential. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jim, please.
My last word would be, though you'll have heard that I'm very excited about what's going on with the data, with the analytics, what matters is what we do about it. We had a question around users, and the point here is that there are a multitude of potential users. We've heard about humanitarian and disaster risk reduction. We've heard about users in the finance sector. This is incredibly important also for land use planning. It's really important for infrastructure investments. It's important for agriculture. It's important for nature. So we've got a multi-purpose technology here, which I think is one of the reasons to be optimistic coming out of this COP.
Thank you very much. Eric, please.
Yeah. My last words will be, I think it is very important to, let us all come together and share the required data, because without the adequate data or enough data or comprehensive data, we won't be able to understand or improve our risk understanding. Because if we understand our risk better, then we can put up proper plans and mitigation strategies moving forward.
Thank you, Eric. Rowan, final word.
Risk modeling can be a bit like having a medical. None of us really want to do it. We're always a bit scared of the news we might get, and it's a bit inconvenient. But it's absolutely essential if we're going to get better, if we're going to get stronger, if our most vulnerable are going to get better, having this risk medical every year is the only way we're going to move towards getting better and not having palliative care. So let's everyone get our national risk medical and get on the treadmill and get better.
I really like that analogy at the end. But I'd like to thank all of our panelists. And I would like to invite you all to reconvene a year from now in Dubai. And let's see the progress that has been made. Let's show some of the examples of the practical application of the risk data and see how we are working together to change lives for the better in the face of the climate emergency. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of the data COP.